You right, guys? I'm the world around you, and this is Pause for Thought on Threshold FM. And this week, we're dipping our toe into the water and hoping something comes up to suck on it, to nibble on the fleshy bit beneath our toenails, to touch the deepest part of our soul. You know what? This week, I'd like to start with a well-known poem to get us going. So, let's should we have a little bit of background noise? Just set the scene a little bit. One night I dreamed a dream as I was walking along the beach with my lord. Across the dark sky flashed scenes from me life. For each scene I noticed two sets of footprints in the sand, one belonging to me and one approximately 4 times the size with a much larger gait. After the last scene, my life flashed before me. I looked back at the footprints in the sand. I noticed that at many times along the path of my life, especially at my very lowest and saddest times, there was only one set of curiously elongated footprints with abnormal spacing. And this really troubled me. So I asked the Lord about it. Lord, you said once I decided to follow you, you'd walk with me all the way, but I noticed that during the saddest and most troublesome times in my life, there was only one set of footprints, and for whatever reason, the feet looked huge. I don't understand why, when I needed you the most, you would leave me. He whispered, "My precious child, I love you, and I will never leave you, never, ever, during your trials and testings. When you saw that one set of footprints you've so callously described, it was then that I carried you." Now, if that hasn't made it obvious to you, this week we're looking into Bigfoot in it, so let's have a song. This is a song produced by Tate Flip featuring Jadar and Floki SB. It's called Double Edged Sword. So the earliest reference that I could find about Bigfoot is from about 800 years ago on some petroglyphs in California. They depicted a group of bipedal creatures that could easily be humans, but they're referred to as the family. Now, the biggest one out of them is a lot bigger than the rest, and it seems to be hairy. But what if that's not actually hair, though, innit? What if it's just crudely coloured in and is actually a depiction of a shadow person, like an ethereal being from another dimension? And just, it looks crudely coloured in because they've had to colour it in with rocks on rocks and scrape the rocks into the rock, and they had no other way of really doing like block colouring. They couldn't just click fill all and colour it in like that. And it's just, we've just looked at it and gone, oh, they must have been hairy, because we're not thinking to ourselves, oh, I draw on rock all the time using other rocks to scratch rocks, so it must be, it must work, but it doesn't. So maybe that could be what it is. Maybe it's not a family as such at all, but maybe it's a representation of a life cycle of sorts, like a way to show what a different group of Native Americans would depict in their drawings about something that I think was called the cycles or the worlds, where they think we're due to enter either the 4th or 5th run of the world at some point, which could, in a way, tie these petroglyphs to some theosophical stuff that we've covered every now and then and we've heard about before, like the 7 root races. But we won't get into them. We're still not touching on that yet. I still feel like we need the groundwork before we get to there. Now, I need to say there are other references to giant humanoids throughout history, innit, like the giants and the Nephilim, but I'm pretty sure we've covered them. We've covered giants in an episode, and I'm sure we touched on the Nephilim a fair few times, but interestingly though, there are other links between Bigfoot and the Bible, innit? Because certain places in America have named their native Sasquatch after activities that they repeat. For example, in one place, the Sasquatches are known as the clam eaters, and in the Bible, right, the Bible tells people loads of times, don't eat shellfish. So I was wondering, could that be why it says that in the Bible? Could it be that because the Bible is a text that's been passed down from Bigfoot to humans? And I know it might seem hard to believe, innit, but there are all sorts of reports of Sasquatches stealing from fishing nets, and I found a few references saying that they steal salmon specifically. So what if they steal that salmon, some of them, the naughty ones, but the good ones gave us the Bible and that, telling us, oh, don't eat the shellfish, because they know that after they've taught people how to fish with nets, they're also going to drag shellfish out of the water, which means they're going to then dunk them back in the water, because they can't eat them, because Bigfoot's told them don't eat the shellfish. So like, well, I'm not going to touch the clams because, you know, the Bigfoot said not to, so I'll just dump them here. And then Bigfoot comes along at night time and swipes them all. Or just comes along when they're not at the nets and picks them out, you know. It's a possibility, innit? And maybe they knew that by teaching them to fish, that they're helping themselves, and maybe that's like a tax, and maybe that's where taxation comes from as well, and why maybe the church kind of taxes people, just as a thought, you know. But you know, if it seems like a good idea, doesn't it, on Bigfoot's part, because it means that they'd have a steady supply of clams to eat, and they don't have to get the fur wet and all, which was going to take a long time because they're very airy, innit, and it's going to take ages to dry out if they start fucking dipping into rivers and that, trying to search around for fucking mussels and stuff. And that does make sense in a way, innit, and kind of alludes to a disagreement in relationships between humans and Sasquatches, because there are a type of Bigfoot creature known as Scum Capes, because apparently they stink, right? So could these Scum Capes from the Southern American states ironically be against the idea of enslaving the humans? And these obviously more friendly bipedal giant apes, the Scum Capes, have earned the nickname of the benign-faced ones, possibly. But I guess if you look at it a certain way, that means that there has to be a nasty ones as well, which further ties into the idea that there may have been a war amongst the Sasquatch between the nice ones and the bad ones, the ones that wanted to enslave humans and make them collect clams and mussels and stuff, and the ones that didn't want to make them enslaved and force them into catching shellfish from inside the water and maybe the odd bit of crayfish and that. It just cements that idea, doesn't it? It really does. It drives it home that there's this idea of warring factions of ape in North America. Now, there are another group of people from America as well, and I don't think they were Native Americans, because a lot of what I was reading about it seems to allude to the fact that the links for their beliefs can come from Germanic traditions. But either way, a bunch of beliefs seem to revolve around them becoming stronger if you know about them or believe in them, even to the point where these people would go out of their way to prevent their kids from ever learning about them, so that they wouldn't go into the woods and look for them. Now, if they were just trying to keep the children away, then they wouldn't even tell them that Sasquatches were there, just so it doesn't pique the curiosity at all, would they? Or they just say, you know, these things will fucking rip your face off, don't go near the trees, because they'll fucking kill you. You know, they knew bears existed, and wolves and coyotes are probably dangerous as well. But if you know all of that's going on, then the idea that they've got to say, we know these things, but don't tell them about Sasquatch, because Sasquatch will take them if Sasquatch knows that these kids believe in him. And that seems a bit strange, innit? But they don't do that. They instead don't try to make it so that they don't believe in them at all. And they try to limit that belief in them if they do believe in them. So in a way, I think that kind of means that Bigfoot could be a tulpa. Now, if we imagine that Bigfoot's a tulpa that lives with the says, or a creature, maybe not a tulpa as such, but a creature that exists within the same rules as Freddy Krueger, in the sense that more knowledge of it and the belief of it makes it more real and, you know, potentially more powerful and dangerous, then that would explain why a lot of experts in Bigfoot who claim to believe in the cryptid say that most sightings of him are just hoaxes or misunderstandings. So why would these people want to say that the very evidence they have is fake? It's almost like these experts are trying to protect us from Bigfoot by preventing us all from blindly believing in it. Maybe they want to invade our world, like Bigfoot in that, and either from another dimension or possibly from the Hollow Earth. I mean, it's hard to tell. But if that is a possibility, that if we believe in them, it's going to make us more accepting of them, because they think about a lot of stuff to do with Bigfoot, mate. They try and make it seem like he's friendly and that, innit? Like, oh, look at him, he seems lovely. Like Chewbacca's fucking Han Solo's best mate. He's on what's deemed to be the good side of Star Wars. But I mean, if you look at it in a certain light, Star Wars, Luke Skywalker and all them guys and Princess Leia and that, they're the baddies, because they're trying to fucking disrupt society in a way, I guess. Now I know the Empire are doing, you know, killing a lot of people and that, but still, they're still in charge, and the others are the rebels. They're the bad people. But we're still made to believe that Chewbacca's a good guy. Now, if we do believe that Chewbacca's a good guy, that could make us then think, if we do see a Bigfoot knocking about in the woods, because you're not going to see it outside your house, it's very unlikely, unless you live in the woods or the forest, or on like a mountainside or something, or in a valley, or, you know, somewhere out the way. They always seem to be somewhere where there's not many people, right, for a start. Now, if if we believe they're good, that means we could go up to them and they could befriend us, and they could start to fucking pump our heads full of propaganda, mate, and that. Do you know what I mean? And there's enough propaganda out there, you know, like, because we know that the reptilians run the galaxy, innit, and maybe the furthest reaches of the universe, and we know that greys are good with technology as well, and we know that the gnomes as well can travel through solid matter, but other than the ability to maybe spread propaganda better than the Nazis did, what powers do Sasquatches actually have? Now, when you break it down a bit, they seem to be pretty strong. And I don't know if you can call it super strength, though, because an elephant's pretty big, innit? Like a Bigfoot's pretty big, and elephants are strong. And I wouldn't try to compare an elephant to a Nazi super soldier or Captain America kind of thing. And an elephant is just proportionally strong to its size, innit? But apparently, Bigfoot can pull whole trees out of the ground and fucking launch them across the sky and weave them to make nests like a fucking huge demented gorilla. Now, I've got no idea if the trees it's pulling out of the ground are whips, saplings, or fully grown trees, but let's assume that they aren't fully fledged redwoods or anything like that, but still, you know, a good sized tree. It's impressive, innit? But I would expect some modicum of strength from something that's 9 foot tall with fucking wrists down past its knees. It's going to have leverage, it's going to be able to grab something and launch it. Now, Bigfoot also seems to be able to camouflage pretty well, innit? And at will, like a more advanced chameleon, or more like an octopus. It's like an octopus of the trees, disappearing into the forest at moments, at a moment's notice, and even seem to have evolved to leave little to no trace of their existence. Now, to me, this implies quite heavily that there's a predator for the Bigfoot if they've evolved to not leave a trace and not be able to be tracked. Because if they don't leave tracks, as in like they don't shed fur, they don't defecate, they don't leave a scent other than the occasional ominous smell of sulphur, which could easily be linked to some form of portal to another dimension or maybe to hell or something like that. But let's bear in mind that it's just a smell that they just emit for now. Then surely that means that there must be something hunting them, or there was something that hunted them, and the ones that couldn't be hunted survived, innit? Does that make sense? Now, it could be, right, that they're so well evolved that they don't need to use their arseholes at all. Maybe they've completely sealed over, no need to poo, and, you know, maybe because of that even less likely to wee. And that's why they've never been discovered, mate. Could that be the smell of sulphur or rotten eggs that's sometimes associated with them? Maybe instead of passing solids, they just somehow emit a gas, like they sweat out a gas, and the bodies are perfectly attuned to destroy everything they eat, whether that's a raccoon, a crow, a handful of berries, or a dead horse that they found in a farmer's field. No matter what it is they ingest, it all gets used. Now, this could mean that they're actually like the proto-human, the original human race. Maybe the inhabitants of the planet from before the Anunnaki arrived there. Maybe they are the fabled Nephilim or the Ajiji, you know, the race of humans that were made for mining gold out of the ground, until one of the Anunnaki engineers worked out that they could just use alchemy and create a smaller, much less territorial and easier to control genetic hybrid out of their DNA and the Sasquatch DNA, and they could use that creature to not only mine gold from down the mines, but also convert everything that they eat and drink into gold, using the mystical chemical that breaks down the food stuff that passes through the Bigfoot. They could fine-tune it to harvest tiny fragments of gold and introduce breeding and sex to the new creatures that they've made, the humans, and then wait for a while until there are billions of these new genetic hybrids. Then they could build an underground network of tunnels, also known as a sewage system, right, to collect all of that processed gold. Now that's already in it's in a smaller, it's easier to manage chunks rather than the chunks that have just come out of the ground as well, and they can take that home to Nibiru and atomize it to repair their atmosphere. Now, this would also explain the relationship many people have reported between alien spacecrafts or just the lights in the sky and their local Bigfoot when they see them, because there are some people that, quite a lot of people have said that when they've seen spaceships and when they've seen them land and the fucking what's it called, come out, what do we call that, what's the thing that comes down, I want to say ramp, but I presume there's a proper word for it, like is catwalk, is it a catwalk when it comes out of a spaceship towards the ground? Let's call it a ramp, because it is a ramp, but I feel like there's a word for it. When some of them say when they see that ramp coming down, that they've sometimes seen like what look like two, like one on either side, a Bigfoot on either side of the ramp, almost as if they're fucking bouncers, mate, outside of a strip club or outside of a fucking Weatherspoons in a particularly rough area. If they've got two bouncers on the door, I would argue, but that would define the relationship between them. Like they're on the door, they're not in the team, but they're on the payroll kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? Like in the same way that the Greys aren't really in the team, but they're on the payroll of the reptilians. Maybe the Greys have outsourced to Bigfoot. Maybe the Greys though are the things that created Bigfoot. Maybe the Greys are the Anunnaki. I mean, we're not getting into that this week. We will definitely. We already have covered the Greys, but we will really get into the Anunnaki. That may be a series, and I wouldn't mind a couple guests for that one. Maybe as a possibility, and we could have a proper discussion about it, like a fucking 5 or 6 hour show, and I could bore you all senseless with just nonsense, and then come back the next week with a fucking hour show on something completely different. I don't know, but anyway, I've gotten lost. So I mean, what were we on about? We were on about ramps and that, weren't we? Oh yeah, people would see Bigfoot and that, and maybe Bigfoot would collect the person and carry the person because Bigfoot's from here, some people believe. So maybe they can touch us in the same sense that we can't really touch a frog without damaging a frog because the oils on our hands will burn the frog's skin. Do you know what I mean? Like maybe that's what happens when the aliens touch us, and maybe they've got all this, but that implies that they've got all of this equipment and stuff, but haven't actually developed a way of making a pair of gloves, which seems very unlikely. Anyway, though, so if the aliens are coming here, that means that maybe, as I was saying, like they work with each other and they're on the payroll kind of thing, but maybe they're not on the payroll. Maybe Bigfoot's like their slave race, and then the Bigfoot has been kind of scouting for people that they could take to molest and probe and insert DNA into, collect and harvest DNA from in order to make genetically modified creatures inside of the moon. It's a possibility, do you know what I mean? But maybe that's why Bigfoot resides in the woods and it's never seen in cities. Because in the cities, and even in much smaller towns where there's less people have access to toilets and the sewage systems. But in the woods, people are just shitting on the floor, innit? Now, I'm suggesting to you, dear listener, that the aliens check in with the Sasquatches once in a while to find out who's not pulling the weight, or maybe more suitably, who's not pushing their weight, at least at home and into the bowl. Meaning that another potential superpower for the regular Sasquatch is memory related. More specifically, a lesser known ability called being a super recognizer. Now, this ability affects only 2% of the human population, but if we are indeed all descendants from Bigfoot, because their DNA was spliced in order to create us, then that would explain where this ability in humans has come from. Now, a super recognizer is a person that can remember every single face that they've seen and bring it back, and that ability must haunt some Sasquatches, fueling their PTSD-ridden minds with flashbacks of events such as the Battle of Ape Canyon. But let's have a song before we get into that. This is Ramp Up by Locksmith and Khan. So the Battle of Ape Canyon's a real thing, innit? And the Battle of Ape Canyon took place in the weeks leading up to the 16th of July 1924 in Washington in America. Now I'm not sure if that's Washington the town, Washington the city, Washington the state. It just said Washington, and I know they've got a lot of them. But there was a bunch of miners alone in a cabin. Now that's miners with an ER, not an OR. They weren't unsupervised children left alone in the woods. That would make this an entirely different story, especially as you learn that they were all attacked in their sleep. But as I said, this isn't a story about child molestation. It's actually a battle, like a fight, you know, a battle that had one alleged casualty and a fair bit of collateral damage as well. So whilst the miners were sleeping in their cabin, they got bombarded with stones, mate, so they could hear doof, 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 and then all of a sudden fucking stones were being launched with enough speed and power to damage the cabin and tear holes through the fucking walls and that, you know. But not just from one side either, so it's not like an avalanche, it was coming from all sides and coming through all of the walls. See, if it was a bunch of miners getting the back walls punctured whilst they slept, it would be a very different story. Do you know what I mean? Like this is why it was very important that I got across to you. It's miners with an ER, not miners with an OR. It's not a bunch of children being taken from behind, having their inner walls destroyed from every conceivable angle. That's not what this is about, by a bunch of massive hairy men. That's not what this is about. These were grown men getting every wall of their cabin punctured with actual flying rocks and stones and boulders, I don't know where you draw the line between rocks and stones and boulders, but I mean, we've probably all draw the line in a different place, don't we, for something like that, I would have thought. Anyway, so the miners, they started to shoot at the attackers, and when they would fire gunshots at the direction that they could see the stones seem to be coming from, which, according to reports, was every direction. So these are just a bunch of people now at this point standing outside of a hut in the woods, shooting blindly into the night. But the stones would stop coming through the walls, and when the shooting would stop, the barrage of boulders would begin again. Then, through one of the holes that had been created by these rocks that were being flung through the walls and that, a big arm started reaching through the hole and feeling around, reaching around through the hole. This is what, again, for the terminology being that was used in the story, this is why it was important, ER not OR. So there was an arm reaching around the wall, besides the axe that was against the wall, apparently attempting to grab at the axe, possibly to try and bring the fighting to an end, maybe as a threat, or maybe to chop the bodies of the miners up as is custom, in axe attacks. But for whatever reason, that arm retreated, whether the creature the arm belonged to just simply couldn't hack it anymore, or realised that it seemed like overkill. Either way, they left the axe alone and retreated back into the woods. Now, one miner by the name of Beck managed to shoot one of the creatures that stood atop the ridge, and they watched as that creature tumbled down the valley to the bottom of the gorge, but no body was ever retrieved. So they probably only harmed the Bigfoot rather than actually killing it, and it probably just limped away or something. But a few years later, in a book that Beck released himself about the evening, he claimed that he believes the creatures are actually extra-dimensional rather than corporeal beings, which is something that I've come to believe too, and I've not even read his book, mate. This is just from a bit of research here that I've done. It just seems quite likely that they are extra-dimensional beings, because that's how they're able to disappear. That's how they're able to watch you and appear behind you, like disappear and reappear, and why they're connected to lots of aliens and folklore stories, and why they seem to be everywhere and nowhere. It just makes sense, and I don't think many aliens. I don't really think that when we're told we live on a planet, mate, on a boulder full of boulders in the sky, we probably don't. We probably just live on a fucking thing. There's got no way of describing what it is. It's just our way of understanding this is what we live on. And they live on the same thing in the same space as us, but in a different part of it, if that makes sense. Like in the light spectrum and that. I mean, this is getting out of it, but it's a thought I had whilst I was reading about this. Now, you think about a rainbow, innit? Like, a rainbow is often seen as a symbol of hope. It's seen as a sign of beauty. It's grace. It's everything nice about the world. But realistically, a rainbow is just a reminder of the prison that we're in, because a rainbow is just our eyes or our brain showing us that. Well, it's us showing us that purely because of how our eyes have developed, either evolutionarily or because they were made by a species of alien by mixing us in with some form of fucking bird for a little while in the moon, or however it was our eyes came to be, to have cones. That's all a rainbow is just a reminder of that limitation of our bodies, that we can only see them colours. We can't really see any, and we can see a mixture of those colours, but nothing else. We can't see the infrared. We can't see anything else. I just thought that was quite nice, and maybe poetic. Maybe it's not. Maybe it makes no sense at all. But I just thought it's worth saying. That there's a lot of people that are trying to be like, rainbows are great. We should use a rainbow for the symbol for this and for the symbol for that, like for the NHS and that. But realistically, could you not argue that by using the rainbow as a symbol for the NHS and various other things in different types of rainbows and that by using the rainbows they're showing that, oh yeah, let's use it for hope, but realistically we're using it to display the limitations that we've already put in place for this thing, this organisation. Just as an idea, it's got nothing to do with Bigfoot realistically, but we'll get back into Beck and his boys anyway. Like, the site where they were sleeping and mining is very, very close to an active volcano, which is a natural structure that's often associated with extra-dimensional entities and with aliens and UFOs and hollow earth entrances and exits and like valves and fucking spaceships and all often associated with things like that in it. So it could be where the Bigfoots for that area could have come from the volcano. But what you've got to remember about Bigfoot encounters is that although they seem violent, there is often little actual violence involved. Like, for example, I read about a bloke in Canada who was kidnapped by a Bigfoot and held like a pet by his family, He didn't give any details in what I was reading about what its house looked like or where it lived or if it travelled through a portal with him and dragged him through a portal. I don't know how he got there and how he escaped, it didn't say. But it just seems odd that they didn't harm him. And it's one of the few actual times a Bigfoot has been seen with other members of its own species as well. And the man claims that, like I say, none of them injured him, none of them hurt him. They just, from what I read, it worded it as if to say they were just entertained by his very presence. Like people that have a pet hamster, you get nothing from a hamster, mate. You get fuck all back from a hamster or a goldfish. You don't really get much back from cats, but we still have them. So maybe the people that go missing aren't taken by the rich and the so-called 1% that come and kidnap children in the night. Maybe that's not what they're doing. Maybe that's not what's happening. Maybe they're selling them off to Bigfoot so that all these different Bigfoot can just have a pet human in their house, just fucking, and they give it the life of Riley, mate. Fucking like how we look after cats. Most people have a cat, they look after it, they get it a little bed, they get it some bowls, they feed it its favourite flavour of food, they get it toys all the time, they rub its belly, they tickle that bit above the tail which makes the cat go like that and freak out a bit, they rub under its chin and they give it love and affection. And maybe that's what's sort of happening. All the kids that go missing, maybe they're not being raped on an island by Jeffrey Epstein's friends. Maybe they're being taken there, but maybe they go there to meet at this portal where they can enter the Hollow Earth Agartha or whatever, and they sell the children to Bigfoot or to a vendor who then transports them to their equivalent of pets at home, which might be, it'd be weird to call it pets at home because obviously that's a name that's used here, and obviously they would never use that. I don't even know if they'd call it a pet shop, but I don't know what they would call it. I don't know if Bigfoots use currency. Apparently they use stones and rocks to try and trade things with us. So, and a lot of children say stuff like sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. And maybe that saying comes from because that's how Bigfoot disciplines the children that they kidnap. Maybe Bigfoot beats these children when he's bought these children, and he beats them with sticks and stones, and that's where this saying came from. This saying came from a kid that escaped, mate, and they said, but names will never hurt me, and that's because the Bigfoot would always give it like endearing names, but the names made no sense to the children because obviously Bigfoot doesn't speak English or French or Spanish or Chinese even. They apparently speak in like clanging wood off wood, so that they're doing stuff like that to you, and that's why that's not hurting you. They're still using the sticks and stones and clanging them together to make noise, but it's not hurting you anymore. So sticks and stones may break my bones, but the names will never hurt me, and that's why they would encourage the Bigfoot to try and just say the kid's name as much as possible. Now, another power that Bigfoot has is their ability to blend in it, and that's something you've got to bear in mind if Bigfoot is out there stealing people's children, and if Bigfoot is kidnapping people's children, and they've got their blending ability to thank for that, innit, really. But this example in Canada of this bloke being kidnapped by Bigfoot is the only example of an actual kidnapping by a Bigfoot that I've been able to find. Now, they do like to stalk people, though, and I quite like when you see a cat in the street, I'll go up to it and I might follow it for a few doors, and so I can give it a little tickle in that. I don't mind. I quite like doing that. I won't do it with a squirrel or with a woman, but I might do it with a cat, in the same sense that Bigfoot might be like, oh, look at them there, the lesser being, I love them, let's go and give him a little tickle, and then it's like, they're just scared of me, they run away, which cats run away from us, so it kind of makes sense, innit? We're Bigfoot's cats, right? But the best part about this, right, is that no one would believe that they've been stalked by a Bigfoot. Now, if a cat goes to another cat, they'd be able to relate and say, this guy followed me home before. If a woman comes home and's like, this guy followed me home before. Or if a guy comes home and he's like, whoa, this guy followed me home before. Or a kid comes home from school and he's like, whoa, this guy followed me home before. Or an old lady, comes home from bingo and she's like, whoa, this guy followed me home before. Or your auntie comes round to your house and she's just come here from town and she's like, oh, this guy followed me to your house before. It's believable because it's relatable. We all know what a guy is, and we probably have all known or seen someone that we think to ourselves they'd probably follow someone home that they don't know. But to believe that a Bigfoot would do that to us just is hard, innit? It's hard. So maybe it's not that. Maybe they're not evil. Maybe the Bigfoot know this, and maybe the Sasquatches are just mischievous and just like to fuck with people wherever they can. Now, random miners aren't the only people who have wrote about them, though, about Sasquatches. Apparently, a president of America, Roosevelt, he's written about them too, so there must be some element of truth to Sasquatches. It was about his notes from speaking to a native, but I can't remember, and I don't want to be wrong. I like to inform you, innit? I don't like to really get things wrong on here. I don't want to lead you astray. So he did write about them, though. Roosevelt did write about them. So if you want to go and look that up, feel free. But you've got to bear in mind that some people can't handle the truth, though, and they want to try and muddy the waters of reality by then trying to convince people that Bigfoot isn't actually a 10-foot bipedal ape creature, and is actually just something that they consider much more likely. So, bear that in mind when you are looking into these things. Now, I say, right, that this is just further proof of the species of creature that David Icke refers to as the Archons, or that Aleister Crowley drew that picture of on his deathbed, or what we've referred to loosely in other episodes as greys. It's said that these creatures can't come up with new concepts or ideas in it, and instead they have to twist what is already there, hence the DNA splicing facility within the moon. And that's the only way they can kind of make something new. Now, the idea of a massive two-legged monkey monster, man, would be a new concept at some point, and therefore probably wouldn't be accepted by our alleged ethereal overlords. But they could try to explain those creatures away by saying something like, it's not 8 foot, 2-footed hairy bloke. It's actually an injured bear that's taken on walking on its hind legs because its legs are sore. It's hurt its front leg, or it cut its chest. It needs to walk upright. Or that they're apes. They're just apes, but they're not the mythical creature you believe they are. They're just a group of travelling orangutans, chimpanzees, and a few gorillas that are all somehow living in harmony with one another in the Floridian swamps. I mean, you can't even believe that, mate. That's so hard to believe. That's harder to believe that there is a group of fucking great apes, the chimps, the orangutans, and the gorillas, right? It's hard to believe that they'd just be knocking about together in a swamp in Florida and be fine with it. Like, fucking chimpanzees are fucking well strong and super territorial and aggressive, and I find it hard to believe that they would just accept living with a gorilla or an orangutan, or even fucking let alone work alongside them in some form of weird community. Now, other information possibly posed by the ethereal entities into the minds of weak humans is that every sighting of a Bigfoot is actually just a sighting of an American Vietnam veteran. I actually read this, guys. Some people believe that every sighting of a Bigfoot is actually just a sighting of an American Vietnam veteran, which is mental, saying that they decided to live in the American forest after getting PTSD in Vietnam. But that gets harder to believe, right? Because you could believe it, maybe that's happened once. Maybe someone saw a Vietnam veteran in the woods once and thought, fucking hell, was that a Bigfoot? He used to be in the army, he could be 7'2" and built like a brick shithouse. And you see him and you're like, fucking hell, that's a big guy in the distance there. And he could have, like a sort of a... Probably wouldn't be wearing a hippie coat if he went to Vietnam, but maybe he has. Maybe he's decided, he might like the fashion, and he's got one of them coats, the leather coats with all the tassels on it. Looks like fur from a distance. Who are we to judge? We can't tell. We can't know for sure. But it does get a lot harder to believe that could happen every single time when you learn that as I said at the start of the show about the petroglyphs, the cave drawings, or not cave drawings, but the rock drawings, the rock paintings and that, of these creatures from about, what was it, 1,000 years ago, 900, 800 years ago, and writings in books from 200 years ago, and even in the early 20th century, long before they went to Vietnam and fucking set fire to the jungles and that. Now, this would mean that the US government have access to time travel, and that for whatever reason they decide that they send their veterans back in time when they develop a mental health condition from fighting for the country. And in my opinion, that just seems somewhat counterproductive, doesn't it? Realistically, that's causing more problems further down the line for yourself, because that means that this person's come to you and gone, "You're right, mate, I'm World War II, I'm riddled with shell shock. Later on, I'm riddled with PTSD," and you're like, right, well, have you heard of John Titor? And the veteran would be like, well, no, who's that? Who's he on the telly? Like, not exactly. No, this is going to all be new to you then. Have you heard of the Philadelphia experiment? No, I can't say I have. No, I've never heard of that. Is this something that I should have been briefed on, debriefed on? No. Don't worry about it. Just we've got a boat, you see, and now if you want to come and step on this boat, what we're gonna do is we're gonna cure you. And then they go and step on this boat or this device that they've probably perfected since the Philadelphia experiment or gotten better at, and then they send them back in time to random places so that they can appear in the woods out of nowhere. And that maybe that's what happened when with like John Titor, where he was fucking like bouncing through time for a little bit, like, and just appearing and reappearing, like fucking quantum leaping it. But they've dressed them all in fucking gorilla suits, like literal gorilla suits, just so that no one recognises the face. It just seems it's not something that you would do, innit? It's not good for your country. It's not good for the world to fake Bigfoot sightings using people with PTSD. It's just not. It's not fair. It's not fair at all. Now, there have been news reports that say people wearing fur coats have been shot in the woods, and that is also used to explain away what Bigfoot is. It just happens to be 10-foot people wearing fur jackets. Now, I would argue if you're going in the woods wearing a fur coat, you're looking to die. You're hoping there to die. Like, that's a crazy thing to do. That's a mental thing to do when you know that your population has guns and that they go out there to shoot creatures. Like, I've not got nothing against hunting, nothing at all. Go for it. Don't kill anything that's endangered if you can help it. But you know, fucking if you know that there's people around there that shoot bears, you know, and I've got this lovely bearskin jacket, and I'm gonna fucking wear it to the woods because it's warm. No, you're a fucking idiot if that's the case, right? But there are a lot of people, right, that believe that I mean, this is the stories that they put on the news. This about the big people wearing fur coats, and that explains Bigfoot sightings because some of them have been shot so-called accidentally. But you could also argue that you could say to an idiot friend, you know, put this coat on and go over there and beat the bushes to get some birds out, and then while he's off in the distance, shoot him and be like, well, he was dressed as a deer and I didn't realise it was him, it was dark, you know, and you're just trying to kill your friend possibly. But this is just news stories anyway, as I'm saying, so you've got to bear in mind that a lot of people that believe, well, not a lot of people, some people believe that the mainstream media is heavily influenced by some of these extra-dimensional creatures in order to make us miserable so that they can feed off our energy. And maybe that's one thing they do. They created Bigfoots, or they influenced the American military to produce time machines so that they could send back the Vietnam veterans to live in the forests, so that these Vietnam veterans could live in the forests and flash in and out of time and scare people who have got low quality cameras. Now, mentioning interdimensional creatures, they're extra-dimensional creatures even. If the Sasquatches aren't actually extra-dimensional creatures, then that would mean that they have real DNA. DNA that could be collected from fur or droppings, but as we've already learned, big feet don't shit. But what about historical DNA though? I was thinking DNA from fossils. Obviously not dinosaur fossils, because as we learned a few months ago, dinosaur fossils are all made in a factory in China. But real, actual fossils from a creature that actually existed. A creature that was a massive 8-foot or so tall bipedal humanoid that looked exactly like a Bigfoot, mate. Now, what if one of those still exists? Well, this creature is called a Gigantopithecus, but again, it seems like the extra-dimensional entities are just trying to trick us with it, to make us look away from their portals and influence on our plane of existence, because according to an actual expert in ancient primatology, I think that's a word that I'm hoping exists, and I'm hoping it means the study of primates. I've plucked it out of thin air. But either way, it's believed by this guy that these creatures might have walked on two legs. Probably did, at least according to this expert that I haven't actually wrote down the name of either. And the reason that we know this is because we can extrapolate that information from a part of the fossil that has been found of a Gigantopithecus, specifically a part of its jaw or mandible, albeit apparently according to the expert it's the wrong part of the mandible to be able to tell if this was actually a bipedal creature that looked like a Bigfoot. But we can tell from apparently what we've got that it looks like it could have been, but we'd need the lower part of the jaw to be able to tell definitely rather than the top part of the jaw. To obviously to be able to tell if the creature walked on its hind legs, and that's never been found, so realistically we're still none the wiser. But I put it to you that if their remains have never been found, then that must mean these creatures aren't solid matter, or, much like elephants, maybe they take themselves off to another place to die, maybe a place within the hollow earth or a different dimension. Maybe that's why there's been sightings around active volcanoes, because they're going there to kill themselves, to throw themselves into the lava, because they're getting old. That's why they're getting a bit grey spots are appearing on some of them, and then they jump into the lava and die. Just as a thought. Alright mate, just a quick little advert for myself. If you're enjoying this, fucking join the Patreon, mate, if you can. For a little as a quid, 2 quid, 3 quid, tenner, whatever you want to throw on there, you get the same stuff either way. Obviously it's nicer if you put like 3 quid on rather than a quid, because I'll only get like 75p out the quid, but still it's 75p more than what I'm getting now. It's just you get access to video versions of these, discounts for canvases and maybe some other little bits off my website, and you get access to the PDF versions, that's the digital download versions of my books. Anyway, I'll let you get back onto your show. Now, there are many names for the Sasquatch. Well, obviously we've got Bigfoot and Menk, where we discussed the Menk in the Dialatoff Pass episode. We've got Scum Cape, which I mentioned near the top of the show. Almas, which we're not really going to touch on, Abominable Snowman, Yeti, the Grassman, which is more localised, I guess. Another very localised one would be the Honey Island Swamp Monster, and Momo. But in the UK, it seems that it still gets called Bigfoot to a certain extent by most of the people that have seen them. And there have been a fair few sightings in recent years. Now, one sighting was in Northern Ireland, and the investigator inspecting the video, or the video evidence at least, suggests that he's never known of a British Bigfoot encounter before this, so I really don't know if I believe his credentials to be an investigator if this is his first time with a British Bigfoot, because after spending 20 minutes on the internet, I'd found dozens, mate. But I'm not sure how long ago this was. But he suggests that it could be possible that Bigfoots migrated. Every Bigfoot that's in the UK migrated during the Ice Age from the Americas and possibly from Asia while the seas were still higher. Now, I looked at some pictures of the beast the lady encountered, and it further reinforces the belief that a Sasquatch's ability to blend and camouflage is incredible, because in the photo, it just manages to look exactly like a snapped tree trunk, which is incredible, and in itself is a strong sign of a Bigfoot in the area, because they do break trees down. Now, the video that I watched that she captured was interesting as well, because the investigator watching it, commenting on the video, and myself, we both turned out to be watching two very different Sasquatch outlines in the tree line, which could mean that in Northern Ireland there could potentially be a breeding pair of Bigfoot, which would be big news for the community, to be honest. Now, I've read a lot of different accounts of British encounters, from all the way from Scotland to Cornwall, and there seem to be some things that tie them all together, whereas in America they all seem to have differences in it. The British Sasquatches seem to all be brown with grey patches. Now, what is interesting is, whilst I can't find any stone carvings of the creatures in the UK, I thought the Scottish, might have had some etchings or something from the Picts or something like that, the Celts or something. But I did manage to find out about something in Suffolk, the load of old churches in Suffolk have got carvings from like the 16th century, the 1500s or so, of what were called Woodwoles, which are basically wild men or big hairy Neanderthals, which there was warnings about and huge warnings about, and still are in some areas to this day. Now, they could easily be a Bigfoot in it, and there seem to be these warnings spread throughout the county, which is mad. And it is a lot like what the Native Americans suggest as a warning about how these creatures are taking children away and raping the locals. And it's unclear whether or not they shagged the children, but we've already kind of discussed this, and I don't want to go into it again, but they probably just kidnap the children and keep them as pets, if not forever, but for a little while. But if they do shag the children, it would explain why the American Bigfoots decided to attack that cabin full of miners and then left disappointed. Now, another thing that we can relate the British Bigfoot creatures to their North American counterparts are the structures of branches that they build, which supposedly resemble teepees. Not with a canvasser out, but the style, the way that they put them up in a sort of cone. Now, it's believed by many that this is their way of communicating between themselves, maybe to indicate territories and stuff. And there was a guy in North Wales as well that I read about, and he thinks he started searching for Bigfoot to help deal with the death of his father, to try and distract him from his real life, he suggests. But it seems really strange because he had a tree thrown at him one night, like a full-on tree, whilst he was out camping in a British Bigfoot hotspot. So, and then a few days later after that, he found a field where all of the sheep had been decapitated. He spoke to the farmer, and the farmer had no clue what had happened, and for some reason people believe it was wild wolves in North Wales, which seems very unlikely. I find it more unlikely that a pack of wild wolves are roaming round the fucking annex of fucking Liverpool and have gone undetected, compared to a lone woodwole lurking in the trees. What's an even bigger shame is that the death of a few dozen ungulates, if that's what a sheep is, an ungulate, is that way that someone has managed to convince this guy that all of this was just in his head, and was somehow him coming to terms with the death of his father. Now, I did find a little tidbit about our other neighbouring country, because we've had Northern Ireland, we've had Wales, we've had England, and with Suffolk, and Scotland, Scotland, which suggested that an ex-primate keeper saw what he thought looked like an overly large bonobo in the woods picking blueberries. Now, very little else about the guy. We don't know much else about him other than the fact that he was an ex-primate keeper. But I don't know if we should trust that source, if I'm honest, because I can imagine that becoming a primate keeper is a very vocational job. That's your dream, and that's a dream job for many people. You've got to be really lucky to get that job. So personally, I question why he was no longer in that job. Like, what had he been getting up to? What had he done? What was his relationship with these apes? But getting back to England, though, coming back across the border and moving south, very far south, down way past the Pennines and coming into the little bend of the country at the bottom, there was a sighting near, from a train, from a passenger on a train, not the driver. The driver was obviously paying attention to what he was doing, but it was a passenger on the train who is adamant that they weren't reading a book or on the phone. And it was near Bristol, about 10 miles or so out of Bristol. And the observer claims that whilst they looked through the window, they noticed this large black figure that seemed to be hunched over whilst it crossed the field approximately 80 metres away. And then it seemed to hide behind a hedge, ducking as if to avoid being seen or in order to watch someone through it. And it was visible, they say, for about 10 seconds to the train passengers. So you've got to question, in a way, how slow was this train going? So that means it must have been going slow if they could observe one field for a full 10 seconds. And because otherwise this thing was moving rapid, but they don't mention anything about its speed. So, and if the train was going slow, they obviously got a good look at it as well. So it's quite believable, more believable than the primate guy, personally, for me anyway. And then a little while later, that same passenger noticed a couple with a dog on a field, and it's only then when it seemed to dawn on them that the person that they'd seen earlier probably wasn't a person at all, purely because of the size difference between this shadowy creature and the dog walkers. Now, I learnt a few months ago as well, I just wanted to get this in there. If you've listened to an episode of Troof Seeking, I may have spoke about this then, but Bigfoot can apparently transform itself now into a moth, if it wants to. And you don't often see a moth during the daytime, and weirdly enough, it's a lot harder to see a Bigfoot at night time. So either there may be something in that's worth further investigation, I'm not too sure, but that's all we've got time for, guys. Now, I'll be back tomorrow for Troof Seeking with Jimmy Budd, and if you could all go to Apple Podcasts as well and leave us a review for the show Troof Seeking, that would be really helpful, because apparently we keep getting into the top 50 shows in the UK, and it would be nice to also have some 5-star ratings on there to try and encourage people to listen to it more. And you know, it'd be nice if you did that for my show as well, but do it for Troof Seeking at the very least. And Jimmy's on later today as well, doing some bits for his birthday, so if you're listening to this on demand, go and find Jimmy on Instagram and send him a picture of your feet with a little message that says happy belated birthday, Jimmy. I'll fucking see you in a bit, guys.
Thanks for listening, man. I won't take up too much of the time because it's over, and hopefully you're listening to all of these one after the other, or on repeat, maybe the same episode on repeat. But fucking leave us a review if you can, mate. Fucking share it with a mate, send it to your nana. I don't mind where you send it to, but if you get more people listening to it, thank you. If you did enjoy it though, fucking join the Patreon, mate. www.patreon.com/worldaroundyou. There'll be a link in one of the links in the description, I would imagine, of the one you're listening to. You can join for £1, £5, you know, and you get access to all the video versions of these. You'll end up about 4 or 5 episodes ahead as well through Patreon, and you get access to some of my books as well, and a little discount code for some of the canvases as well. But even if you don't join that, fucking thanks for listening to it, mate. I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully, here's the next one.